The hall smelled faintly of orchids and champagne. But under the glittering lights of my engagement ceremony, I felt the air squeezing out of my lungs. Every shimmering decoration, every polite laugh, felt like a cage closing in. My fiancé, Ethan, squeezed my hand, his touch a small anchor in a stormy sea. His voice was a low whisper meant only for me. "Hey," he murmured, his thumb rubbing circles on my skin. "Relax, Anna. Tonight is supposed to be about us." I tried to force a smile, a pathetic little curve of my lips that didn't reach my eyes. I could feel my parents' stares from across the hall, sharp and heavy, burning holes straight through me. They stood together like they always did, a perfect, united front of cold steel. My dad, Richard, was propped against a marble pillar, the expensive watch on his wrist glinting under the chandelier. My mom, Leah, held that fake, stiff smile she wore like armor, her eyes scanning the room, judging everyone. They weren't here to celebrate me. They never were. They were here to perform. I had been dreading this day for weeks. Not because I wasn't deliriously happy to marry Ethan, but because I knew my parents would use it as a weapon. Every milestone in my life, big or small, was just another stage for them to remind me how little I mattered compared to my younger sister, Chloe, their golden child. And right on cue, just after the photographer announced a quick break before the speeches, Dad caught my eye and gave a short, sharp jerk of his head, motioning for me to follow him into the quiet side hallway. I hesitated, my stomach twisting into a knot, but Ethan gave my hand a reassuring squeeze. "It's fine," he whispered. "Go see what he wants. I'll be right here." I stepped away from him, my heels clicking softly against the polished marble floor. The happy chatter of the guests and the soft music faded behind me until I was alone in the dimly lit corridor with my father. He was leaning against the wall, scrolling aimlessly on his phone as if my entire engagement party was a boring inconvenience. He didn't even look up when I stopped in front of him. "Where's the $137,000, Anna?" His tone wasn't a question. It was an order, flat and cold. I just blinked at him, my mind struggling to catch up. "What?" "The wedding fund," he said sharply, finally, lowering his phone and his voice. "The money you've been saving for the past 4 years. I need you to hand it over." My chest tightened until I could barely draw a breath. I had worked 2, sometimes 3, jobs for years to save that money. Late night shifts at the diner that left my feet aching, early mornings stocking shelves at the bookstore before the sun was up. Surviving on barely enough sleep to function. I did it all so I could give myself something beautiful for once in my life. That fund wasn't just money. It was the one thing in my world that was completely and totally mine. "Dad," I said quietly, fighting to keep my voice from shaking. "That's for my wedding. For Ethan and me. We don't care." He cut me off without a flicker of emotion. "Chloe needs it." I froze. My blood ran cold. Of course, it was about Chloe. It was always about Chloe. "Chloe needs a deposit for her new condo," he explained, as if it was the most obvious, logical thing in the world. "Your sister's future comes first. You understand? Her future." A bitter, strangled laugh escaped my lips before I could stop it. "Her future? She already has a brand new car you bought her, a closet full of designer clothes, and a full ride to college that you two arranged. I worked for this money. I earned this." His face hardened into a mask of stone, and before I could even think to step back, he slammed his open palm against the wall right beside my head. The sound echoed in the hallway. "You think we're going to let you waste that much money on some tacky, pointless ceremony?" He spat, his face inches from mine. "You're lucky we're even letting you get married at all." My stomach churned with a nauseating mix of fear and anger. "No," I said, my voice firmer than I felt, my fingers clutching the engagement ring on my finger. "I am not giving you the money." That's when Mom appeared, her heels clicking like knives on the tile. A slow, cruel smirk spread across her face when she saw me standing there, cornered between them. "Are you really going to make a scene on your own engagement night, Anna?" she drawled, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Just give your father the money. You'll find another way to pay for your little fairy tale." I said no, I repeated. My voice cracked this time, but I stood my ground, my chin held high. Mom tilted her head and let out a laugh. It started soft, then grew sharper, a sound designed to cut right through me. "Eat dirt, Anna," she sneered, her eyes filled with a disgust I knew so well. "That's all you deserve, anyway." I took a shaky breath, trying to push past them, to get back to the light and noise of the party, back to Ethan, but Dad stepped forward, blocking my path. Without any warning, he drew back his foot and kicked me, hard, in the stomach. The air rushed out of my lungs in a silent gasp. I stumbled backward, hitting the wall hard, choking on my breath as a white-hot pain shot through me. My hand flew instinctively to my stomach, my body curling in on itself to ward off the agony. "Richard," Ethan's voice boomed from the end of the hall, filled with a fury I had never heard from him before. He had seen it. He had seen everything. The music in the main hall stopped abruptly. A confused murmur rippled through the guests. I could hear gasps, shocked whispers, and the sharp, distinct clink of a champagne glass being dropped onto the floor. Dad turned around slowly, his face a perfect mask of calm, as if he hadn't just physically attacked his own daughter on the night of her engagement. "This is family business," he said coldly to Ethan, his voice dangerously low. "Stay out of it." But Ethan didn't back down for a second. He was at my side in an instant, his arm coming around me, gently helping me straighten up while his eyes burned with rage as he glared at my parents. "You're unbelievable," he hissed. "She's your daughter. She's a burden," Mom replied without a moment's hesitation, folding her arms across her chest. "If she actually cared about this family, she'd do what's right and help her sister." I wanted to scream, to cry, to lash out, but the pain in my stomach made it hard to breathe. Still, I forced the words out, low and steady, each one tasting like victory. "You don't get my money." The silence that followed was deafening. My parents stared at me as if I had just uttered the most vile curse, but for the first time in my life, I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. Ethan's arm was a solid, protective weight around me, but I could see the flicker of fear in his eyes, not for himself, but for me. And somewhere deep down, in a place I didn't know existed, something inside me finally cracked. The Anna who had spent her entire life begging for their approval, the Anna who had broken herself into a million pieces trying to earn tiny scraps of their love, died right there in that hallway, under the soft glow of the orchid and champagne lights. I didn't know it then, but that single, brutal kick was going to set off a chain of events that none of us could ever come back from, because if they wanted a war, I was done playing the part of the dutiful daughter. This was the very last time they were ever going to make me feel powerless. I couldn't sleep that night. The engagement party had ended hours ago, a disaster of whispers and hurried goodbyes, but the memory of my dad's foot connecting with my stomach and my mom's chilling laughter kept replaying in my head like a horror film burned onto my eyelids. Ethan tried to convince me to rest, his voice soft, patient, and full of a love that was the exact opposite of the venom I had grown up with. He cleaned the scrapes on my back from hitting the wall and held an ice pack to my stomach, but my mind was a raging storm. Every insult, every dismissal, every lonely holiday, every sacrifice I had ever made just to be treated like garbage by the very people who should have protected MIT all collided in my chest like wildfire. By 3 in the morning, I was sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, the glow of my laptop screen illuminating my face. Ethan was asleep on the couch nearby, his presence a silent comfort. I stared at my bank statements, scrolling through. For long years of exhaustion and determination, every paycheck I'd fought for, every extra shift I'd taken, every dollar I had painstakingly saved. $137,000. That fund was so much more than just money. It was proof that I had clawed my way out of their dark shadow on my own. It represented freedom, choice, and a dignity that my parents had always sworn I didn't deserve. And tonight, they had tried to rip it away from me as if it were nothing. But here was the thing my parents had forgotten after all those years of beating me down. I am my father's daughter. I learned how to think like him, how to calculate, how to predict his moves, how to set a trap. And if Richard and Leia thought they could humiliate and assault me and simply walk away untouched, they had severely, fatally, underestimated me. I opened another folder on my laptop, a secret collection I'd been building for years without even fully realizing why. It was my insurance policy. It held photos of Chloe's lavish condo and her fully paid-for car, all bought under my parents' names with money they had borrowed from our extended family under false pretenses. It held screenshots of text messages where Dad had bragged to his brother about hiding assets to avoid paying his fair share of taxes. It held scanned documents proving that Mom had been repurposing Chloe's so-called student scholarship funds, which she had manipulated to get into Chloe's private shopping sprees at high-end boutiques. I had never thought I would use any of this. Some small, naive part of me kept holding out hope that maybe, just maybe, They would wake up one day and see me, truly see me as their daughter instead of a pawn in their twisted games. But after last night, that hope was gone, burned to ash. I didn't want them in jail. Not yet. That would have been too simple, too merciful. I wanted something slower, something more poetic. I wanted them to feel what I had felt my whole life, the slow, agonizing process of having everything you care about dismantled before your eyes. The first step was bringing Ethan in completely. The next morning, I brewed coffee and laid it all out for him on the kitchen table. The years of financial manipulation, the secrets, the stolen money, the lies. His jaw tightened with every word I spoke, his knuckles turning white as he gripped his mug. "They can't get away with this, Anna," he said finally, his voice trembling, with a quiet, controlled anger. "Not after what they did to you last night." "They won't," I whispered, sliding a printed photograph across the table. It was Chloe, posing in front of her condo, all smiles and holding a bottle of champagne. "This condo isn't in her name. It's in Dad's. And what Dad doesn't know yet is that the homeowners association he ignored for months has already filed a lien on the property for unpaid dues." Ethan's eyes widened. Meaning, I said, a faint cold smile touching my lips. "With the right anonymous tip to the right people, they'll lose it. Every last thing they've been funneling my savings toward will be gone." But it wasn't enough. Losing a condo wouldn't break Richard and Leia. Their power came from their control, their carefully crafted public image. To truly destroy them, I had to take away the one thing they loved more than money: their reputation. For decades, my parents had built a flawless reputation in our small town as the perfect, charitable family. The proud, successful couple with 2 daughters, one brilliant and perfect, Chloe, and one rebellious and difficult, me. They had the neighbors fooled, their co-workers fooled, and even the elders at their church wrapped around their little fingers. But reputations are fragile things, especially when you know exactly where to press to make them shatter. I began gathering the records. Chloe's fake scholarship invoices, Dad's secret offshore money transfers, Mom's charitable donations that were actually payments to her personal shopping account. Every slip-up, every stolen dollar, every shred of irrefutable proof. And then, I waited for the perfect moment. 2 weeks later, Dad called. His voice was as sharp and demanding as ever. "You've had time to think, Anna. Send me the $137,000. Or you and Ethan can kiss that wedding of yours goodbye." I almost laughed. Out loud. "Actually, Dad," I said, my voice dripping with false sweetness, "you should probably focus on Chloe's condo first. I heard the HOA is moving forward with foreclosure." There was a long, sharp silence on the other end of the line. Then, a furious hiss. "What did you do?" "Nothing you didn't do to yourselves," I said, and I hung up the phone. That was the first domino. Within days, Chloe's condo was gone. Her car, also registered under Dad's name, was repossessed after an anonymous tip about unpaid loans. I could practically hear my mother's screams from 3 neighborhoods away when she found out. But the real blow, the one that would cripple them, hadn't landed yet. That was still coming. I had been quietly feeding every piece of documentation, every screenshot, every invoice, every single lie to the one person my parents feared and respected in equal measure, Reverend Graham, the head of the church board where my father proudly served as treasurer. One anonymous package, delivered by mail. One perfect storm. 3 days later, at the Sunday service, Reverend Graham stood before the entire congregation and announced a temporary investigation into financial irregularities within the church's leadership. I didn't even have to be there to imagine the chaos that followed. People who used to worship my parents' perfect image started whispering behind their backs. Invitations to fundraisers and dinner parties suddenly dried up. Dad was politely asked to step back from his treasurer duties until the situation was clarified. It was all very subtle, very quiet. There were no headlines, no police cars at their door. But in a tight-knit community like ours, this was a death by 1,000 cuts. Ethan watched me from across the kitchen that night, his gaze steady and his voice soft. "You're different," he said, not as an accusation, but as an observation. I nodded slowly, sipping my coffee. "No," I replied. "I'm just done." And yet, deep inside, I knew this wasn't the end. This was only phase 2 of my plan. Because if Richard and Leia thought losing their money and their respect was painful, they hadn't even begun to learn what it feels like to lose complete and utter control. I was going to take the very last thing they thought was untouchable The one thing they had lorded over me since I was a child. Their pride. The night of my cousin's engagement party was heavy with noise, laughter, and an ocean of fake smiles. Everyone in the extended family was there. All the aunts and uncles who had spent years whispering about how difficult and ungrateful I was. All the cousins who had watched my parents parade Chloe around like a princess while treating me like a piece of inconvenient furniture. I hadn't planned on going, but sometimes fate delivers the perfect stage right to your feet. 2 hours into the party, I walked into the grand hall with Ethan by my side. I could feel a ripple of shock go through the crowd when people saw me, the black sheep who had apparently ruined her own engagement and run off in shame. And there they were, Richard and Leia standing near the buffet table, holding court as if they owned the very air everyone breathed. Chloe was with them, shimmering in a gold dress, sipping champagne as if nothing in her perfect world had changed. I walked right past them without a single word, my heart pounding a steady, determined rhythm. The program began. People clapped for the happy couple, and I waited. My palms were sweating, but my heart was steady, cold, and sharp as a shard of glass. Because tonight wasn't about shouting matches. Tonight wasn't about begging them to acknowledge my pain. Tonight was about dismantling them, piece by agonizing piece, in front of everyone they had ever fooled. When the official speeches ended, the host, my cheerful and oblivious uncle, handed me the microphone. And now, for a few words from the bride's cousin Anna, he announced. I stepped up slowly, my heels tapping a death march on the marble floor. My voice was soft when I began. I wasn't actually going to speak tonight, I said, my eyes scanning the sea of familiar faces. But since everyone I grew up with is here in one room, I thought maybe it's finally time for a little bit of truth. Richard stiffened. Leia's practiced smile faltered. Chloe froze, her champagne glass suspended midair. You all know my parents, I continued, nodding toward them with a chilling smile. The proud, successful couple who raised the perfect family. But what you don't know, I held up a thick folder I had been carrying, is what they've done behind your backs to make it all look that way. I opened the folder, pulling out printed screenshots and invoices, holding them high for everyone to see. Here, I said, my voice gaining strength, are the charitable donations they bragged about in church, deposited directly into Chloe's personal shopping fund. Here's the prestigious scholarship Chloe flaunted, the one that was stolen from a more deserving student through my father's connections. And here, my voice rang out across the nauseant room, are the offshore transfers that helped them dodge paying a single cent in taxes? While pretending to sacrifice so much for their children, gasps echoed through the room. It was like a wave of pure shock washing over the crowd. Then I turned and looked directly at my mother. You laughed at me when Dad kicked me on the floor at my own engagement party. You told me to eat dirt because that's all I deserved. My voice cracked with emotion, but it did not waver. But now, everyone here can finally see the dirt you've buried yourselves in. People began murmuring, then talking openly. Cell phones were out, their cameras flashing as people took photos of the documents. Documents were passed from hand to hand. My parents' oldest friends, the ones they used to vacation with, were whispering behind their hands and taking slow, deliberate steps away from them. Leia's face had turned a ghostly white. Richard reached out, his face a mask of fury, trying to grab the folder from my hand, but Ethan stepped smoothly in front of him, blocking his path. Touch her and you'll regret it for the rest of your life, Ethan said, his voice calm but lethal, cutting through the rising noise. I turned my attention to Chloe, whose smug smirk was finally, beautifully, gone. That condo you loved so much. Foreclosed. The car you paraded around in, repossessed. And that perfect reputation Dad worked so hard to build for this family. Consider it gone. Someone in the crowd muttered, I can't believe this. Another woman said, all those donations we made ... stolen. And then it happened. My parents' oldest and closest friends, the ones they used to brag to about their perfect life, turned their backs on them completely, creating a visible empty space around them. That was when I smiled, not a smile of joy, but a smile of finality. Here's the thing, I said, lowering the microphone, my voice calm and steady for my final words. You spent your entire lives teaching me that I had no value. Tonight, everyone here knows who the real trash is. I set the microphone down on the table with a soft thud and walked out of that room, hand in hand with Ethan, leaving behind a buzzing hive of betrayal, disbelief, and the complete and utter destruction of my parents' world. By the next morning, their phones were blowing up with calls from angry neighbors. disappointed church leaders, and even their bank, inquiring about their sudden financial instability. Every mask they had worn for decades was gone, ripped away. In a single night, weeks later, word spread that they had been officially removed from the church board, blacklisted from all their former social circles, and were now facing a series of crippling financial audits. Chloe, stripped of her glamorous lifestyle, had been forced to move back in with them into the ruins of their life. They had wanted me on my knees, broken and begging. Instead, I left them crawling in the rubble of the prison they had built for themselves, and for the very first time in my entire life, standing in the morning sun with Ethan, I felt completely and totally free.